Hello and welcome again to everyone who just joined. We're just waiting for everyone else to stream on in, and we should get started in about a minute or two, so stay tuned. Thanks. Hello everyone, welcome to today's webinar, Enabling Flexible and Skilled Cross-Functional Teams within Agile and DevOps Organizations. My name is Jesse Richard and I'll be your moderator for today's session. First we'll go over some housekeeping, then we'll do some introductions, and at the end we'll have a Q&A section to go through any questions that you may have. So to ask questions, first of all, thank you to everyone who submitted them in advance. We will try to get through them all time permitting. If you do have any additional questions as the presentation continues, we invite you to ask them in real time using the questions panel in GoToWebinar. And like I said, we'll have a 5 to 10 minute Q&A session at the end of the presentations. And just as a heads up, the recording and the slides will be made available to everyone who has registered. We'll be sending out an email by the end of the week. You will also be able to watch the webinar again on demand on our IT Alerting website under the resources section, as well as on our IT Alerting YouTube channel. And there's a bit.ly link there on your screen for you. And also, if you would like to read the slides as we go, they are located in the handout section of GoToWebinar. And now I'd like to introduce you to our two speakers. First up, we'll have Troy DuMoulin, who's the VP of Research and Development at Pink Elephant. Troy is a leading IT governance and service management authority with an extensive background in executive IT management training and consulting with over 20 years experience. Troy is a frequent speaker at IT management events and is a published and contributing author for multiple books on topics such as Lean IT, Defining IT Success through the Service Catalog, and official ITIL publications, including ITIL Planning to Implement IT Service Management and Continual Service Improvement. Troy was also recently named one of the top 25 industry influencers in tech support by HDI. After Troy, we'll hear from Vincent Geffray, who is the Senior Director of Product Marketing here at Everbridge with a focus on IT response management, IT alerting, and communication. He has over 16 years of experience with the information technology business, designing, implementing enterprise IT operations management solutions, including critical communications, application performance management, and IT process and workload automation. He has an international experience as he started his career in Europe. And with that, I would like to pass it over to our first presenter, Troy. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Jesse. All right, let me get started on here. Can everyone see my screen? Jesse, can you see that okay?
Looks good.
Awesome. All right, today's topic, we're going to talk about structure and how structure can either enable or impede, productivity and agility. You probably heard something like this, but in my experience, structure eats process and or automation for lunch. In fact, if you have a structure contrary to your objectives around agility and productivity and increasing flow, in the end, structure will always win. So getting the structural element of an agile environment right is a critical success factor. In fact, I'm going to make the case that it sometimes can precede anything else, including process and automation, and still achieve some of the objectives that everyone has around increasing flow and speed to market. So in that context, it's a very important subject for me personally. And of course, with this will come leadership of that structure. So that's what I'll also focus on as well, that give you a sense of what we're going to cover. I like to always start with how did we get here kind of conversation. Why are we in the situation we're facing now, which is very silo-oriented? I'll quickly go back in a brief historical perspective on that. But then we're going to talk about creating a culture of continual improvement, a culture that focuses on the results of a team versus the individual focus of a technical silo or domain. And then we'll get into different approaches to teaming structures, and we'll talk a little bit about how that moved from traditional cross-functional models into the Agile space, and now what's changing in the DevOps environment as well. Now, a lot of questions have come in ahead of time, which is great because it allows me to kind of pinpoint some of that discussion as we present on this topic. So let's begin with the beginning, and let's go back a few years now and think about how do we end up with the current organizational structures we have today. It all comes back to the early organizational design work done by gentlemen such as Adam Smith and Frederick Taylor, who was big into the scientific management perspective, focusing on task specialization and time and motion studies, but it really kind of becomes simpler than that. You see, we had large industrial organizations which had a significant and specific business problem. Their business problem was how to repeat and consistently create product with the same level of quality and product attribute. So for example, take someone probably everyone well knows, our friend Henry Ford, well-known father of the automobile industry and the manufacturing context there. To take the Ford problem. The Ford problem is this: I have to create a value chain of deliverables that creates the same automobile off the end of the value chain consistently, repeatedly at a managed cost. Now, our friend Henry Ford, though, was challenged with three primary constraints. A, he had largely a rural workforce that didn't have a lot of, higher education, so their skill sets and their knowledge were not attuned to the specific work of the industrial age. Also, the challenges around automation. Literally, the best they could hope for would be hydraulics. And the third one was the communication tools to keep this now probably fairly long and complex value chain connected as a coherent value chain. We're talking literally telegraph. So with these triple constraints, they were focused on how do we consistently create quality at cost. To do that, they took this complex value stream, let's call it 1,000 steps, okay? From raw inventory to produce Model T out the other end, right? I'm going to take these 1,000 steps and break them down into individual steps, and then I'm going to give each individual one thing and one thing only to do. So Jesse, you're going to become bumper master, all right? And Vincent, you're going to have steering wheel, and that's your job. In fact, I'm going to create an entire certification scheme and career agenda for you to become the best bumper master in the industry. I'm going to give you despecialization in this one technical area, and you're going to start as an apprentice. Then you're going to go to journeyman. Eventually, you're going to become the master of that trade, and then you're going to go on and create other masters. So this structural approach created a great deal of positive energy around task specialization, deep specialization, but it also created vertical organizational structures focused on that. For example, because they artificially broke apart that now 1,000 steps, I had to put a foreman who knew 3 steps over top of that. And now a manager who understood at a higher level the context of 3 or 4 foremen, and then a senior manager above that. And so what we create now is organizational structure, which is probably relatively top heavy because I had to put more and more management layers in place to manage the context, the system understanding. But what I've also done is I've told you, Jesse, what are your focuses on? Jesse, what is your focus? If I had to ask you, what is your job? What will you tell me? You would tell me that you're focused on bumper mastery, right? In fact, if someone came along and said, can you help me with this other thing over here, or I've got this meeting that I need you to attend, and you're going to say, well, if I can fit it in, because my job and my only job is this one thing over here. In fact, we measure you only on that. We focus all of our management systems only on that one competency area for you. So it invariably creates this sense of this is my job and this is only my job, putting an artificial boundary around that. because what we've done is we've gone for deep specialization at the cost of creating a culture of collaboration across this systems mindset. We see that today in both the business and the IT functions. Of course, we now look at applications and databases and servers, and the key is this is the mindset that has created this structure of division versus collaboration. So we're up against 200 plus years of organizational structure architected to focus on specialization over collaboration. Now, we're going to come back to the specialization conversation because it's not negative in its totality, but it has to be added to it with the systems thinking model. So let's come to that perspective now. What we're trying to do with these cross-functional teams is create a team mindset. And by the way, a team is different than simply assembling a group of individuals who have individual focus. If I bring together this group of people and they still believe that I'm just a DBA in this conversation, or I'm a business analyst, or I'm a developer, or I'm an architect, and that's the only thing that they're willing to put their hands to, I don't actually have a team. I have a group, which are very different. As you can see here from the definition of Ketchenbosch and Smith, a team has collective sense of accountability and responsibility for the output of the total versus I've got my piece done, now it's over to you. So this is very much a cultural change where the team is understanding that they have collective accountability for the results of the team which are beyond and above their own specific specialization. This takes a completely different way of identifying the team's objective, measuring the team, and also leading the team, which we'll come back to. The challenge we're facing in organizations is we've basically, by the spirit of how we lead organizations and individuals, we've created a mindset where I come to work and I'm successful if I do my job. How do I know what my job is? Well, my manager will tell me what my job is. I come to work, I've got some capacity, I line up at the desk and I say, okay, what should I do today, manager? And I get my A, B, and C orders for today. I go and do A, B, and C. I come back when that's empty and I say, okay, what's next? And so I've got this concept where I'm constantly looking for direction for someone to tell me what to do, whether that's my daily job or it's even in the concept of improvement. This concept is not what we're focusing on. In Lean, we call it a Kaizen mindset, or a spirit of continuous improvement, if you want. There's a certain population in the organization that you're working in today that don't operate that way. Even though the structure and the management systems may be set up for that to exist, how they operate is something different. They come in, they're not waiting to be told. They see something that needs to be done. They pick it up without someone asking them to. They figure out, okay, how do I solve it? And they get it done. We call this above the line thinking, and this model, by the way, is from Roger Connor's a book called The Emerald City. The interesting context I want you to think about is your population, your employees, the people that you work with. I want you to think about what percentage are below the line. Now, they could be simply, positive people waiting to be told, or they could be very much down in the basement in the curmudgeon area, the trolls, if you will. And they're all, though, at some level, dependent on being directed. What percentage are self-managing, but more than self-managing, are interested to come to work every day because they just take joy in what they do? Now, I ask this question across the industry, by the way, and I typically say, what percentage are above that line? The people who just come to work, and you don't have to wait, they pick it up, they see it, they own it, they solve it, they do it. In the conversations that I typically have, that will range anywhere from 15 to 5% of the total population. Now, this is a challenge because if you put together a cross-functional team and they're very much below the line waiting to be told, they're not going to naturally, move and gravitate to this culture of self-management. They've been programmed for decades, if not their entire career, to be waiting to be told what to do from a project manager, from a specific line manager. And so part of this whole struggle that we have is to move people into the above the line thinking. Now, another key component when we assemble our cross-functional teams is that we don't put the right people with the right culture, more along the lines of above the line than below, onto your cross-functional team. You assemble this team, it's not necessarily going to do anything. right, or operate any differently. You'll find that very quickly someone will come in and start to dictate or direct exactly what this team does. So it's very much a cultural as well as a structural challenge. So to give us a sense of different governing models across this concept of a cross-functional self-managing team, I like this model. It's by Richard Hackman. He's a professor at Harvard Business School. And he describes 4 levels of team governance, if you will, that you can find in an organization. This first one here is manager-led. And this is the typical situation where a team is assembled, or a cross-functional team is assembled, but they wait to be told. Or just bring it back to the functional team, the traditional domain expertise. I have a group of people, they have skills, they have knowledge, but they pretty much are dependent on the manager to say, here's what your priorities are today, come back to me tomorrow, we'll talk about tomorrow's priorities. Line up, queue up, if you will, and we'll talk about what you do next. The next level, of course, is this self-managing concept, where I pull together a team, and as a manager, I stop myself from directing exactly what is getting done. I may, as the product owner, if I'm in an agile context, do the backlog grooming and then make sure that the backlog is always having the higher value work at the top, and then, of course, the team is enabled to take off the top shelf, and the top shelf only of that product backlog, but then they are enabled to figure out how they get things done. So they're given context about what to do and what priority, but the how is left up to them. This is that concept of a self-managing team in an execution perspective. One step up from that, though, is what's called a self-designing team. Not only can they decide among themselves who does what and how work will get done, they also get to self-form. And this is an interesting perspective because it has a direct implication on the type of people that get invited to this team and then get to stay on the team longer term. I'm going to give you a personal example from my own life in a moment to describe how this works. The final model is self-governing. This is a cross-functional team that's been assembled, and this is not a self-managing team because they also determine what they will work on, not just how it will get done. So this is not what Agile or DevOps or Lean talks about, because this is a team that's basically doing its own thing and ignoring the fact that it's inside a larger ecosystem or value system where a product strategy or an overall service portfolio plan is done above the team level. So we're not going for self-governing. But let's think about the self-managing and self-designing. So I'll give you one metaphor, for example. So I have a son, his name is Noah. He's 17 years, actually that's my youngest. Noah's 19. Noah's in the second year university program, and he's part of a cohort for a program focused on advanced game design and entrepreneurial studies. And so the school, in their first year, assembled these students into a cross-functional team. Every semester they build a game, and the games get every year more complicated as you would expect. But this cohort, this team that Noah is part of, they are measured, and their results as a team are on the total product of the team, the game design, in its completeness. So their measurement is not on an individual performer level, but it's on a team level. Now the interesting thing about this discussion is that when Noah was in high school, he was an average student. He was B's were great. We would celebrate if B's came home, typically C's. He's not a mathematically inclined person. He's more artistic. He gravitates more to the design concept of the game. So in high school, we were lucky to get him to study 12 hours ahead of an exam. He's challenged with math, but he wouldn't study because he wasn't interested. But now he's in this university program where he's part of a group. He has affinity for this group. He cares for this group. He cares about being in this group, and he doesn't want to let this group down. So it's completely changed his above-the-line thinking. Now, his accountability is completely different. He will study at least 5 to 7 business days ahead of an exam. And the only thing that's changed is this concept of group affinity and sense of belonging. Now, add one more component to this. While the school chose the team on the initial cycle, if you will, or iteration, the second year team is a self-designing team. You basically have to be re-invited back to the team, or you can be voted off the island. Now that might seem a little bit severe, but I want you to think about, again, what it does to lift this personal accountability to above-the-line thinking. Because they're caring about the team, wanting to be on this team, and they like each other, their levels of accountability and therefore productivity have completely transformed. A B student now will study, anywhere from 2 weeks ahead of time because of this concept of self-governing teams that have accountability for collective results. So this is an incredible way to change culture, not just create higher levels of productivity. So thinking about this team, when you're pulling it together, it's more of an art than it is a science. You're looking for diversity in a number of ways. You're looking for diversity in technical domains because you do want to pull together specializations, yes, but you want to pull a person together that's going to not just say, this is my job, I'm a bumper master, I don't do anything else. So this is a culture of willingness and openness to do other work. Experience, background, technical capability. The more diversity, the more potential for innovation, which we're going to see in a moment. And the other thing that I'd like you to consider when you're pulling this team together is part skill, part culture, part experience, part background. But I want you to consider also this concept of persistence. So any team, as it goes through this normal cycle of I form the team, then they start storming, then they norm, and they finally perform, right? It takes a while for a team to go through this natural cycle. So the difference between an agile team and a DevOps team is that an agile team only exists for the build, for the project mindset, for the, when we're done, the team gets to disband. First of all, even if it was only in the build context, it would be better to keep this team consistent and move them on to the next collective build than to simply disband and also then, let them reform. But in the DevOps team, we move beyond build and focus not only on build but on support. The key component of DevOps is if you bake it, you build it, you get to support it, which, by the way, changes a great deal of the quality aspects of things that actually flow into production, because escape defects take on a whole new meaning if I have to live with that going forward. So that, again, has another interesting implication of shifting left in the context of quality. But now this team is not just build, but it's also doing support. It's in the context of planned work, that's in the backlog, but I now have to also manage the unplanned work, and I have to find a way to look at both of those in my product backlog. This persistence thing changes a lot in the culture, but also the quality of the experience and the customer perspective. Now, self-organization itself, by the way, in cross-functional teams, these are not new concepts. It wasn't developed or, imagined as a new thing in the agile space. Cross-functional teams have been around for a long time in the auto industry and other sectors as well. So there's a lot of research on this. One of the research sources you can go to is a woman by the name of Glenda Young, and she talks about how cross-functional teams work. She talks about a container. The cross-functional team, self-managing, self-designing, but not self-governing, is within a larger context of an ecosystem, a product strategy, a portfolio. So that's the container, if you will. Now, the very concept of letting them work together in unpredicted ways and encouraging diversity in its formation allows for the differences of the team with the unique and unpredictable aspects of the exchanges between the team members to come up with completely new and innovative things. Now go back to that self-managed versus directed concept. In a directed concept, you might have a very smart person, an engineer type role, saying, here's how we're going to get it done, here's the best way to get it done, but I can guarantee you that's the only way it will get done. People are going to do what they're told, do it productively, but they're not going to think out of the box, right? They get her done, they get results, but innovation is not what we get. We get execution. Directed teams can execute, but they're not necessarily going to come up with innovation concepts because this is where the unpredicted nature of uncontrolled exchanges come into place as long as they're within the container context. So this is what the Agile team is built on, right? We have the 3 roles. Now, the thing I want to talk about in these 3 roles is there are only three roles. There's a product owner plugged into the larger business ecosystem. They understand the container. They're the focus of how to, of course, prioritize the value aspect from voice of customer and critical to quality, which are lean principles of value-based driven work. The Scrum Master, not directing what is done, not a project manager, right? The Scrum Master is the coach of the overall Scrum process, which makes it, a discipline approach for using Agile Scrum, but also the development team. Now, the thing I want to note about the fact that this team has three roles and three roles only is it doesn't matter what specialization you bring to the development team. Once you're placed on this team, you leave your business card and your ego at the door. So if you're an architect, well, wonderful, but when you're part of the Scrum team, you're part of the development team, that's what you're called. If you're a DBA, fine, but you know what? When you're on this team, you're a development team member. We leave that specialization at the door. Another key component of this concept is that it's programming this culture of cross-functional collaboration and collective results. I'm going to explore that in just one moment as we talk about T-based people. So coming back to the DevOps discussion though. So think about the teaming structures of an organization who are focused on Agile and DevOps to be kind of three broad phases. The first phase is I don't have a team. I have the dev group over here and I have a tribe called ops over here and I have the wall of confusion between them, and we talk about things being thrown over the wall all the time. So that's, of course, the situation we're trying to fix. The second stage is where this team now grows in its membership. The Agile team has only got membership from the point of view of build. So along comes additional people to attach to this team, making it a little bit larger. Kind of like the Romeo and Juliet, Capulet and Montague forced marriage, but the reality is eventually they're going to get to know each other and they're going to go through that normal teaming model, and eventually they're going to find themselves in a place where they actually like each other. Might take a couple generations, but we get there through the normal process of team forming, especially if it's self-designing, by the way. So now I've got people who have operational stakeholder requirements. I have people from a non-functional requirement who are considering security and supplier management, IT service continuity considerations. And so this team grows, if you will, from a point of view of membership. And you might say, well, how big is this team? Are we kind of leaving the two-pizza team concept behind here? Not necessarily. I want you to think about any family. They're the people who live under your roof. Those are the blood relatives, right? The people you see every day. But you have cousins. They come by on the weekends. And by the way, they're cousins to other families, other product teams, quote unquote. And then there's that crazy uncle who stops in once in a while, unannounced, but they come. And the key is I have an extended family, and you can pick your friends, but you can't pick your family. So this concept of identification grows. Now, this is not the final stage of this teaming model, because in essence, it is challenging for this now set of, we'll call them cousins and crazy uncles, that's the people in operations and non-functional roles, to extend themselves over multiple product teams. So the next stage of this is where I create a platform as a service or infrastructure as a service type model where I'm creating do-it-yourself, self-help type of functions through APIs. I still have relationship between the two teams, but I'm able to extend that relationship because I've created automation to enable a further kind of pollination of this concept across teams. So that third stage is kind of the best stage, but the reality is most organizations can't jump automatically to having a full-fledged out central digital backbone for the pipeline. That's usually something that's collectively built over time. So this concept of teaming, I want you to imagine, grows in the concept of membership. So a lot of what we've been focusing on here is this concept of who is the right person to be in a cross-functional team. This is where I'd like to bring your attention to something described as a T-shaped individual. And so this is a thing, you can actually Google this. How do I enable T-shaped individuals? So I'm not looking to put on this team a pure generalist who has no subject matter knowledge in depth in any specific subject, because I do need to assemble team members who have deep specialization in a specific area, whether that's business analysis, whether that's testing, whether that's quality assurance or development. I do need specialization. What I'm trying to avoid, though, is to come up with a person who only has this I mentality, the pure specialist. I'm looking to fit into this team someone who has historical specialization, but is open and willing to basically lend a shoulder or pair of hands to other work as required. Now, the interesting thing is, of course, over time, the context of their shared skills becomes broader. Now I get more specialization. Now, I want you to imagine just a couple more metaphors here. Think about your Navy SEALs, right? Their advanced strike team. And you have a specialist on that strike team who is focused on, the communication specialist. You'd hope that that's not the only person who can function a radio, right? So you're going to have to focus this team on cross-training and skills and knowledge. This is a key component of its team formation. Now, just give you an example. Imagine you're using a Kanban, right? And this Kanban is a board that represents multiple stages of work in a given process, whatever that process is. And one stage in the Kanban currently is, it doesn't have any existing work because there's a bottleneck on the upstream task and they haven't released the work into the next step. Traditionally, in a manufacturing sense, if that was happening, well, then the step that had now capacity to do continual improvement would focus on its own thing. It would sweep the floor, if you will, but not in an Agile DevOps team. If I suddenly find myself with additional capacity, I don't just now take care of my own house. I jump into the next queue where the bottleneck is, and I say, I'm here, I've got a pair of hands, what can I do to help? Right? Because this is the context of a practical specialist with despecialization, but willing to pick up skills and knowledge in other roles over time. Again, this is about culture as much as it is around the right assembly of the right skills and knowledge. So much of this, of course, comes from how you lead the team. Because you can set up a cross-functional team, you can assemble the right people with the right culture, the right mindset, the right specialization, but what if now that the product owner, for example, sees their role as, I have to direct the team in what they do every day. So, while I'm assembling a product team, the product owner feels that they have to dictate how work gets done, not just what. Or the Scrum Master, traditional project manager, now aka Scrum Master, still believes that it's their role to actually own the work breakdown structure and they're accountable for directing. Or there's a functional manager who puts one person into a team from their now competency or capability, but is not content just to assign their person to that team, but also feels that they have to be part of the directing and prioritization of that person's work. Or, yes, they put that person in a cross-functional team as a member, but then they tell their team member, well, your priority is this functional work in the department. Your second priority is that cross-functional product team. Any of these above scenarios are going to basically poison your well. You're going to lead opposite to what you're trying to achieve. So these are, be very careful how you lead point of references, because you're creating an environment as a leader that enables self-management or self-design, not self-governing, and you're focusing on that in a way that the team is moving above the line in their culture. So you're creating a purpose. What is the team's greater purpose that's bigger than the individual? You're creating a sense of shared values. You're measuring them as a collective group, not individual tasks. But you can also focus on how do you create innovation by creating rules of engagement, where inside the team, anyone has the right to challenge the concepts being thought up or presented. This is an interesting thing called creative abrasion. There's a book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. The interesting thing is that innovation comes through debate, through dialogue. But you need to create a ground rule where any idea is possible to challenge, but you can't challenge the individual. You can't attack the person. So you're creating rules of engagement, how teams structure and how they communicate. I'm just going to give you one example. I'm just about done. I'm going to hand it over to Vincent. But I want to share with you how I myself kind of failed at this in my own career. So at one point in my Pink Elephant history, I'm 20 years now working with Pink Elephant, I was a principal consultant. I spent most of my career working with other organizations, and people paid me to have an opinion. I was paid to have an opinion. I was an engineer, if you will, in that context, and that's what they valued. I was then given a team in around 2005, and what I assumed was basically that what got me promoted from a top chief engineer was what also would be the best skill as a leader. So I brought that I have an opinion and that I have the good opinion concept to the table and to my team. So here's how the team structure began. First of all, of course, I'm not trying to be egotistical. I value the input of my team. The first problem hits us, and they all come at me and say, okay, we got this problem. How do we solve it? So I'm listening to person A and person B and person C. I get their input. I ask their thoughts, and okay, I say, good. Now here's what we're going to do. You're doing A, you're doing B, you're doing C. Go. And so off they went, and they got it done. And we got it done in a spectacular fashion. That was awesome. We kicked butt on that problem. Next problem comes in. Okay, bring it in, team. Let me hear. Okay, A, B, C, right? Okay, now go. And I sent them off. And so we got really good at solving problems and execution. But I want you to think about what I was inadvertently doing to my team, not knowing what I was doing. Because it had to be me making the final decision, and I was directing on how we were going to call each play, I became, of course, a bottleneck in this process, but I also programmed my team to be completely dependent on me. I was literally the gumball machine of wisdom. I was doing it for very virtuous reasons, but you have to understand the cause and effect that that had to my team dynamics. Right? We got results, but I was not getting a team that was collectively coming up with innovative approaches. They weren't thinking for themselves. So all of this concept we're talking about, this structural discussion, this whole measurement system, now collective results, culture, it's more important, in my opinion, than process and or automation. The other two are critical. They're three-legged stool things we're talking about. But if you put automation and process in place, but then have a different culture or leadership style, you can expect basically that structure will always eat the other two for lunch. There's lots of good stuff, right? Collective commitment, we get better productivity, we get more innovation, faster new product development, people above the line versus below the line in your culture. In fact, I will put out there that if you get your teaming right, even if you weren't able to, move on to process or tools, you'd still get improvement in productivity. Of course, the important thing is that all three provide even more value, and that's where I'm going to toss it over now to my friend Vincent to talk about the concept of automation.
Thank you, Troy. And so I guess I'm going to be the steering wheel master in the assembly line, right?
You could be much more than that, Vincent.
Let's try to be a good steering wheel master right now. Okay, so Jesse, can we see my screen? Okay, perfect. So thank you again, Troy. So we talked about how cross-functional self-managing teams can help to transform an organization so that we can deliver new services faster. And that's all great. Now, as we all know in IT, in the real life, bad things also can happen, right? And as we are getting better at delivering faster, the point I want to make today is that we also need to improve our ability to respond fast at the same time. And that's what I want to discuss now. See how we can apply what we've just learned to the IT response teams. And I want to do that through the lens of building the team, but also communication, collaboration, and coordination. So why are we doing all these? So the answer is pretty simple. It's because we have to. This is what our customers want. That's what they ask us. Your customers, our customers, and pretty much everyone, all of us want speed. We want new services faster, and guess what? When it breaks, we want fast recovery. So Troy just walked us through the organizational changes and improvements which are really required if we want to be able to deliver better quality products faster, right? And he talked about DevOps with goal, for instance, is very simple. With DevOps, you want faster delivery with improved stability. So basically what you do is you deliver smaller chunks of software, but you're going to release much more often with a higher cadence, right? Why is it going to be more stable? It's because upfront we are incorporating the non-functional requirements so that when it comes or when it hits the production environment, it's less likely to break. But speed here, as you can see on my slide, also applies to our own ability to recover from a failure, from a service disruption or service interruption. And as we know, as I just said, even in a perfect digital world, bad things will happen, right? Example of that, I mean, we have examples every day. Your retail website might be going slow, might be unavailable. Why? Due to a network outage, due to a DDoS attack, a cyber attack, due to an application failure. We may be losing our connection to the ERP, therefore the supply chain application is not available. We may be having issues with the electronic medical record system if you work in a hospital, for instance, right? So what's very interesting here is that when you think about it, these are the very same customers that we are trying to please with faster delivery that will become frustrated and upset at us. When I say us, is really the organization, when services are not available. So on one end, we try to deliver new services faster. On the other hand, if they're not correctly deployed and not working properly, we are going to impact the satisfaction of those same customers or users. So, and when this happens from a customer perspective, the same organization is responsible for the quality of the service, right? So, what's the issue we're trying to tackle here? Well, responding to major IT issues. And so do you think this is an easy thing to do? Actually, it's not. It is not easy because in those situations when something like when we say, you know, IT hits the fan, every minute counts because it can mean big loss for the company or exposure for the company. Think about a cyber attack, for instance. And in those situations, we know that a lot of people are going to lose their mind. It's extremely stressful situations. People get to be hypersensitive. We've even heard stories where some people would just resign on the spot. So that's why, as we get better at delivering faster, we also need to get better at responding faster. And as you know, organizations have invested in tools and solutions to automate some of the steps of the resolution process. You may be using already APM tools, application performance management tools, network performance management tools, even correlation. So that's the New Relic, the Dynatrace, the App Dynamics, the SolarWinds, the Mooksoft, Microsoft SCOM, Xenos, Nagios, and so on. And also ticketing systems such as ServiceNow, BMC, to try to get better at identifying an issue. At the same time, on the IT operations side of the house, we've adopted frameworks and best practices. Troy talked about ITOL, ITSM, Lean IT, COBIT, and so on and so forth. Other best practices and frameworks to get better at running the actual services. Now, if you look at the complexity of our digital systems today, should it be in the cloud, on-prem, a combination of both, and the fact that most of them must be available at any time. This is really calling for a reliable and consistent way to respond to those critical issues. Because it's one thing to have those tools in place, and it's another to define the underlying processes and therefore the teams that will allow an organization to recover in a timely manner, but also every single time, not only once. So, talking about the team. So, what is the team responsible for? As you can see on the slide here, we're talking about assessing the issue. The first step is going to be when something goes wrong. How important is it to the organization? What type of incident are we facing? What is the severity? And you can refer to urgency and impact as defined in the ITIL framework. So let's say we've got a P1 or severity 1, a major incident. How do we need to respond? That's going to be phase 2, right? Phase 2 in the process. How do we need to respond? Who are the best suited people that we need to engage quickly? What teams should we involve? And we talked about teams before. Who exactly on those teams? Do we need everybody on the team, or do we need a few people, but those very people to participate in the resolution of the incident? Are those people available? How do we know if they are available or not? How can we reach out to them and make sure that they are going to respond? And what if they don't answer? What do we do next? These are the type of questions that we need to ask when we're ready to constitute or to assemble this team. Now, once we have the team, we need to make sure that they are set for best collaboration and coordination, right? And it's going to be a different story if for a specific incident we just require 5 people to collaborate on an issue. But what if we need 10 people? What if 50 people are required? What if we need more than that? We've seen restoration call with 100 people. And by the way, those people I'm talking about here, the resolvers or the IT experts, are the very same people that we've already assigned to the Scrum teams and the Agile teams that Troy was talking about before. They are your highly skilled knowledge workers. So for collaboration, how do you make 50 people collaborate together? What tools are they going to be using? Well, answer is it depends. It depends on the number of people. It depends on the location. Are they in the same location? Maybe they can fit in a conference room. If they fit in a conference room, maybe they can use the whiteboard, and the whiteboard is going to be the collaboration tool. Now, if they are remote, do we need a conference bridge? How many conference bridges do we need? Is it enough for them to collaborate? Do they need more than just that? Do they need a chat? How about regulations and compliance? These are also questions that we need to ask. Let me give you an example. If you work in finance, it's most likely that any P1s or severity 1 incidents will have to be reported internally. And you might also be required by law to record all the conversations that occur during the restoration call, as well as saving a copy of the chat conversation. So these are elements that are going to drive who should be engaged and how people are going to work together, again, to reach this common goal, which is recovering faster. And number 5 is going to be driving the resolution to a completion, including making sure that whatever fix we've introduced into production has actually resolved the issue and restored the service. At the same time, so now if we look at the structure of the team, at the same time, this team needs to communicate with other stakeholders in the organization. So on purpose, what I've done here is I made service desk part of the self-managing response team. And really what I mean by service desk here is the communication function. is the link between this team, which is self-managed and is going to go do anything they have to do to fix the issue. I wanted to show you that you also need a communication layer as part of the team to be to keep your impacting business users informed on the progress of their incident resolution, but also have a direct line with senior management who's going to be anxious about the impact on the business. Think about a cyber attack, for instance. If this leads to a data breach, many people in the organization are going to be involved in the internal communication around the resolution process. So we need to get to a point where we can streamline and scale the response process. So just like what we've discussed for service delivery, we need the same level of structure and collaboration for the response team. So how do we measure the cross-functional team's performance and effectiveness? We can use what's already in place today, and like I showed on the previous slide, MTTR is a good metric that you can keep for overall team performance when it comes to resolving an incident. But what you want to do, you want to get more granular, and you want to be looking at each individual subsection, the 5 steps that I talked about. Doing so, you'll be able to identify where the teams are spending the most time. You will be able to identify the possible bottlenecks. And over time, just like we do for continuous delivery, we want to be able to improve the process as well. So for example, if in your organization you still reaching out to people via email to get people to collaborate on an issue, that's what we can call spray and pray. You blast an entire team and hope that someone's gonna jump in and respond. In this situation, where we really have no clue and no indication when people are going to actually get back to us with acknowledgement saying, yes, I'm available, I'm going to be working on this issue. So we can't predict, we can't provide any estimate on when the services will be restored. So in this case, you should be able to see that the time to respond is going to be totally inconsistent across the different incidents, across the different teams, and across also the different timelines or time frames. Another point I wanted to make is that one size fits all support in those configurations will show limitation, especially as we put or release more and more services into production. We are basically increasing the likelihood of new IT issues. And what worked yesterday may not work today. So the L1, L2, L3 rigid structure may not be adequate for fast resolution. We need to have an adaptive problem-solving strategy here to engage not only a response team, but the right response team, and quickly. So if we look at the team and see the interactions with the rest of the organization, you see that resolving an issue is not only about fixing the problem, but it's also communicating with the different stakeholders and making sure that impacted business users are notified of the issue, but also of on the progress on the resolution. Again, doing so, you'll be able to see your number of calls into your service desk go down as people know what's going on. So for the self-managing response team, what you'll find IT responders, most likely your engineers from the product scrum teams, from infrastructure, from operations. If you have DevOps, these are going to be people that are going to be part of this team. But compared to a product delivery team, you will also find people from the support center, like I said before. Can be an incident manager, a major incident manager, a incident leader, or customer support. And this team this team will be responsible not only for fixing, but also for communicating and keeping everybody updated. So let me move, I'm looking at the time here. Let me get to what are the 6 challenges that an organization faces when responding to those critical IT events, and especially if they want to do this quickly. The first one is the ability to quickly, and the word quickly here is very important, ability to quickly assess the severity of the issue to trigger the appropriate response. Based on the type of incident, I need to do this. If, then do this. Number 2, quickly identify and locate the best suited engineers or resolvers to accelerate the investigation. And as you can see, compared to a product Scrum team, this team is dynamic. We don't know upfront who's going to be part of the team. You are basically assembling a team on the fly. 3, ensuring that we can engage with the people and assemble this dynamic response team. So engage here means not only reaching out to people, but making sure that they respond and they are engaged. 4, collaboration and coordination. What tools are they going to be using? What communication channels are they going to be using? 5, making sure that we keep stakeholders and impacted business users updated. And 6, because we want to improve and we want to streamline and provide consistent response processes, post-mortem is going to be a very important phase here. Post-mortem and continuous improvement. What have we learned? What can we do differently next time? And there are solutions on the market to help respond to critical IT events faster. And Everbridge is one of those, as it provides integration with your monitoring tools, ticketing systems. Depending on the severity of the incident, the nature of the incident, it will automatically identify what teams or individuals to reach out, and the system will know who to reach out to based on who's on call. Smart routing will make sure that people are being notified and can also respond. If they don't respond, then automatic escalation is going to kick in. And this is going to reduce alert fatigue and also increase accountability. Troy talked about accountability, and just to give you an example here, if I know that if I don't respond to a notification, my colleague is going to be called next, I am going to be more inclined to answer. Same for collaboration tools. Let's make it simple for response team members. In one click, let them join a conference call, whether they are in Chicago, in San Fran, in Beijing, or in Europe. And for compliance reasons, once we've finally closed or resolved the incident, let's make sure that we capture the trail of everything that has happened during the resolution. That includes the conversation, but also the chat window, so that we can not only comply with an audit trail and recording, but also do a post-mortem and see what went well, what didn't go that well, so that we can improve for the next time. And finally, a few proven benefits of that organizations that have implemented response automation have seen. Like I said, reducing alert fatigue, because only the absolutely required people are going to be engaged. It's remove inefficient handoff between the different phases of the process. There is no in-person confrontation, since a system is calling each and every one on the team. Same for escalation. Makes it easy for on-call people to engage. It's a one-click thing to collaborate. Like I said, impacted business users being proactively notified, this is going to reduce the number of calls into your service desk, keep everybody updated, and again, post-mortem will be based on fact-based data and metrics and will provide insights for continuous improvement to see if we've got the right people on those teams and we follow the right processes using the right communication, collaboration, and coordination tools. So with that, Jesse, I'm afraid we won't have time for questions.
Just one. Maybe we can just have one. It seems like we have 1 minute. So I know a lot of you had asked questions. We'll try to get to some of them. The first one that came up is, how can we ensure that the core skills of the BA or QA are not diluted by cross-functional work on Agile teams? Troy, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I'll take that one. All right, so the BA, the business analyst role, is actually one of the roles we want to see in the extended team I talked about earlier. So that business analyst role is very good in their job in helping to understand what those business requirements are. So there's a couple of ways to look at this. And by the way, for those of you hearing my response, I espouse the concept of integrated service management, which brings in the ITIL as well as the Agile and the Lean and the DevOps all together in one collective view. So I think about roles like business relationship management, which goes after strategic conversations and then translates those into requirements, right? So the BRM function is constantly having discussions with the line of business, the business unit. And when that engagement begins now in detail, the BA, who's by the way kind of a junior BRM in the making, should be part of those dialogues to translate the general strategy conversations and capture, document, and understand requirements. That's one concept of how the BA comes into the picture. Another concept how the BA comes into the picture, let's say we're looking at that product backlog. And the user stories, of course, there's 3 stages when we're trying to flesh out the user stories. There's in the backlog itself, where it moves from theme to epic down to user story, and we get in more and more detail, and you tip that card over the other side, you get the success criteria, right? The BA can be part of fleshing out the additional details on the other side of the user story. What does success criteria look like for each user story? And that happens in the the grooming world. Part of the sprint, we're constantly looking for more detail around user stories, and there's a interactive discussion between the development team and the product owner, and maybe even direct to the consumer. The BA can be part of that discussion as well. And of course, on the review and retrospective side of the other side of the sprint, the BA is involved in capturing feedback on the review and the product demo and capturing that for further backlog grooming. I mean, I could even go into more of a hybrid mode where you actually have sprints for stage gates, and where the BA is part of sprints on that side of things, but that might get into controversy, but I do believe that's a possibility as well.
Great, thank you, Troy. And it does seem like we are just about out of time, so thank you everyone for your questions. Feel free to reach out to either us or Pink Elephant if to get any remaining questions answered. I want to thank you also, Troy and Vincent, for the great presentation today. And like I said, I'll be sending out the recording and the slides to everyone via email by the end of the week. And you can also see it on our YouTube channel or on our website, SlideShare, and social media if you want access to it there as well. So thank you again. Thank you, Vincent and Troy, and thank you for everyone who joined us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse.